Welcome to the Global Citizen Life podcast. Today on the show, we have Chris Miles. Thank you, Chris, for joining us today.
Hey, it's a pleasure being here, Sally. I'm so excited for this conversation. This is like a fun conversation, not like, some of those dark ones that you get sometimes.
Yeah, it is a fun one. And we were chatting just a few minutes before we started recording. But you have gone from the traditional kind of job, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, or I have a feeling you were working more hours than that, to what you call work. What was it again?
Work optional.
Work optional, that's it, and I like that. So, for a lot of our listeners and people, like, they do wanna move abroad, but perhaps they were or are in that 9 to 5. They have to be at the office, so they it's harder for them to do it, or, they're kinda starting up or they're looking at options to make money or to do things on the side. So how did you go from your 9 to 5 to your work optional lifestyle?
Yeah, not easily. And that's not because it's not easier than it could be. I mean, I made it harder because I kind of took the meandering way to get there. But then I
Mhm.
realized I could have done it much easier, and that's kind of what we've had a lot of other people do as well after I've done it. But really, when I talk about work optional, it's really meaning that you work because you want to, not because you have to. Because so many
Mm.
people they almost don't even like the word retirement, right? Like retirement almost sounds like you're like putting a horse down, you know? It's
Well,
because
when I hear it, I'm like, "I don't think I'll ever retire."
well,
But
I tried twice.
I work, like, sometimes ridiculous hours, like 12, 14, 16 hours a day, but I don't
Uh-huh.
feel like I'm working 'cause I
Right.
don't watch TV. I don't like, to me, if I'm at home, if I'm not reading a book, cooking, cleaning, I'm working on something because it's what I enjoy doing.
That's exactly it, right? Well, and that's the thing. When you're having fun with it, it doesn't really feel like work anyways, right? It's kind of like how I sometimes get lost in looking at different exotic type of marathons and things like that, especially as I'm starting to want to go, across the globe and all 7 continents run a marathon.
Oh,
But
fun.
yeah, that's the thing. Like work optional really just means you have typically enough passive income coming in to cover your expenses so that you could quit if you want to, but you don't have to. You can still keep working, especially if you love it. I think the
Mm.
worst thing you do is doing something that you love and then quit because you think, oh, I can quote unquote retire. No, you can really be work optional. And I learned that firsthand. Like I used to be a financial advisor, the traditional salesman in a suit. I would preach the retirement thing. I would tell you, hey, you just save up for 5 million years, and then eventually, when you're old and gray and you probably can't walk anymore, now you can finally live the life that you want. And it's funny because like I kind of got into that because I was hoping one, I'd learn about money for myself because I wanted to have some freedom. And then two, it was actually inspired by my dad a little bit because my dad, he was always talking about how, he's the cheapest son of a gun you've ever met, right? Like this guy is like badly cheap. He says frugal. We all know he's cheap, and he'd always say things like, hey, we can't afford this. We think money grows on trees. I'm not made of money,
Oh, I know those ones, yeah.
Yeah, all those things that get ingrained into you as a kid, right? And so, but the one that really hit me the most is he said that he thought that his job would literally kill him from the stress, from the stress of
Oh.
like heart attacks, strokes. He'd already had those by his 50s. And so I thought, well, maybe I can give him some freedom. Well, 4 years into my profession as a financial advisor, he reaches out to me, says, well, when are you going to advise me? And so I sit down, saw his money for the first time in my entire life because he was very guarded and scared about
Mm.
losing money, right? Well, I sit down with him. He had stuffed money in his 401ks, in his retirement plans for decades. He paid off all of his debt, 100% debt free. This would be what Dave Ramsey would refer to as like financially free type of person, right?
Mhm.
However, when I looked at his money, I said, Dad, here's the deal. You're 61 years old. Despite being debt free and it's staved in all your retirement accounts, if you want to retire today, you better hope you die in 5 or 6 years. That's when you're going to run out of money.
Oh, wow.
He's like, well, okay, well, that's not the answer I wanted to hear from you. What do I do? Mr. Sunshine. And I'm like, I don't know. You did everything right from what I teach as a financial advisor. And that
Right.
bothered me. And it kind of got me, when the student's ready to teach her peers, I'm talking with a friend that he was actually a real estate or he was a financial advisor that I trained, but then he left to go do real estate investing. And he started
Okay.
questioning me on the same thing. He's like, well, how many of your clients are financially free? None. Well, how about you guys as financial advisors? How many of you guys are free off the investments, not off the commissions you're earning? None. There's your problem. And so I started going down this rabbit hole of like real estate investments, but not like being the active real estate investor where I'm a landlord dealing with tenants, toilets, and trash. But instead, more how can it be the passive hands off where I'm financing it, but other people are doing the work. So I can be more
Mhm.
hands off and I can do it from anywhere in the country or the world for that matter. And that's what I started doing. And so later that next year, after I quit being a financial advisor, I vowed never to teach about money again. Later that next year, I was able to quote unquote retire or be work optional myself when I was 28, almost 29 years old. And and people are like, "Wow, how'd you do it?" I'm like, well, simple. I got my money to actually start paying me income. That was all. It wasn't like just set it and forget it, let it compound because it's the eighth wonder of the world, as some people lie about, right? It's like, no, it's not. It's not about that. It's like, how do I get it to pay me income right now? And even though I went through the recession, the great global financial crisis that kicked my butt, I went from millionaire to upside down millionaire. Had to dig out of that debt
Mhm.
hole and then do it a second time, and I was able to do it by the end of 2016 again. Then it was like, okay, this wasn't accidental. I can prove it actually works. And I've really been helping others do the same thing, right? Where they can do that. And some of them even gone and, traveled abroad, and that was their whole goal. They're like, I just want to be an expat, and just be able to live life on my terms rather than just working and slaving away. Even though some of them kind of loved what they did and some of them still work, while others are like, you know what? One of them shut down her business. She's like, I was gonna ramp up my business in my 50s, but I just don't want to anymore. And so I want to slow down. So let's go to Bali. So that's a
Nice.
cool thing. You just get options, right? And that's really where freedom comes from, is when you know you have options, kind of like we were talking about when we were on the air, right? When you have that extra, the extra visa, the extra, residency or whatever you have, right? That can open up more doors and more flexibility and give you more options.
Absolutely. And I think, options are key. And there's a few things that you said too that just totally resonate with me of just having those options as you just said,
Mhm.
and the retirement, as I said earlier, like I said, I was never going to retire because I
Mhm.
guess for me, part of the problem is when we think of work, like it's like work. It's so bad. It's so awful. Like
Mhm.
it's something we have to do, but we hate it. Um,
Yeah.
and for some people, unfortunately, I'm sure they do. And I strongly advise everybody, that if you hate your job more than 80% of the time, because there's nothing that's 100%, even though I love what I do, there's parts of it that I'm just like, oh, I don't want to have to do that today. And
Mhm.
I do it, but it's getting past that. And sometimes it's momentarily. Sometimes as um, Gary V says, so if anybody listens to Gary V, he says sometimes you have to eat crap for a while to get to where you want to be. And he doesn't mean that like obviously literally, but just like you have to
Mhm.
do that crappy job that you don't like, but you do it for 6 months, a year, whatever it means. It's that kind of means to an end. Or for the younger people, you stay living at home longer because, and you don't like to do it, or you get roommates. You think, well, I'm
Yeah.
30 some years old, I shouldn't have roommates. Well, when you live in expensive cities like London and Barcelona and different places, it's very common for adults to have roommates because housing issues and the expense and stuff. But even if you
Yeah.
didn't have to, the money that you could save. And so it's that doing those kind of crappy things that we don't really like, but then using that money wisely, as you said, to get that money working for you instead of just sitting in the bank or spending it or now buying new shoes or a new watch or a new whatever, more expensive car. Um, that's a way that those things are gonna keep us more trapped than having that money work for us.
That's right. It really is, like, it's that mindset, and it gives you, I mean, that's where options are important, and it really, what kind of lifestyle do you wanna create? It's I remember, there's one couple I worked with where the husband was working full-time, the wife was part-time. The husband's like, I'd rather just stay home with the kids. Like, I'm really kind of more a homebody, I'd rather do that." Where the wife's like, "Good, because I really don't want to. I wanna get out." So we just got it to the point where, got a little bit extra cash flow coming in so then they could flip flop, right? So then she could work, do her the way she does it. He stayed home with the kids, and that's the kind of fun thing you can do. I mean, I even in my own life, I'm like you, like I can't retire. I tried twice, and every time I got depressed because I remember, my wife and I, we both had, previous spouses, now then we got married, blended families. We have 8 kids together, and
Wow.
she decided with her 2 kids of our 8, she wanted to homeschool them, and she wanted that freedom. And even when we were getting married, she said, "Okay, Chris." two terms if I'm going to marry you. One, that no more kids. I can't handle anymore. So make sure of it, buddy.
That one should have been an easy yes.
That was an easy yes, even though it was a little bit scary for me. I'd never done surgery before, right? So I was a little scared, but I knew it was an easy one. And then the second one, she says, I can't do any more Utah winters. Like I'm from Venezuela and Florida. Like I'm a tropics girl. I need to get somewhere
That's an
warmer in
easy yes
wintertime.
for me too.
And it was. And so I said, well, let's do it, and I thought in my mind it would be so much harder than it actually was. But when I actually did it, I realized, what? It's just trading one expense for another. It's not that much more, depending on where it was. And we went to California that first year, which is more expensive than Utah, but still, it was easier than I thought. We just had to reshift and reprioritize so that we could do that, and spent 2 months in California, and now dang divorce decrees limit us to 30 days, but it is what it is. But they didn't
Right.
want us like leaving for a couple months with the kids and stuff. But no, it's fun. Like we get to choose that life on our terms, and I think that's really why I always tell people it's not about how much you save. In fact, if you're trying to be an expat and you're stuffing your money in a retirement plan like a 401k or an IRA, that's the worst place you can put it, because now it's locked up. You put it in prison, and as a result, you're now stuck in that prison, right? You've now made a life that says, nope, I'm stuck in this job. I got to stay here till I'm at least 60. Before then, I can choose my life. But I'm saying, well, if I kept that money outside of those plans, kept it liquid, but instead got that money in a place where it can actually generate regular income for me.
Right. And that makes a big difference. I have a friend of mine who's in a job that, I mean, she literally had to take, for health reasons, time off because I
Yeah.
told her, I said, your job is going to kill you. Like, you've still got, well, she goes, another 20 years. I'm like, that's a long time in a job you hate. Sure, uh, it'll be a great income, pension, but
Mhm.
what if you don't even make it there? And I've
Yeah.
seen it, unfortunately, I've seen it happen. I remember one time I was teaching for a company that I taught first aid and CPR,
Hmm.
and I went to teach for 'em, and the one gentleman said, "Oh, did you hear what happened to so and so?" And I'm like, "No, he's probably about to retire, he should be retiring." And he said, "No, he had a heart attack and died." I was like, "What?"
Oh,
I'm like, "No, no, 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 he's retiring." Like, the last time I talked to him, but it was probably less than a year before that. I'm like, no, him and his
yeah.
wife, they're planning to travel the world. They're waiting for retirement. It's what they're going to do. She's been waiting for him to retire. They're looking forward to it. And then unfortunately, it doesn't happen. And not only that, part of the thing about retirement that I think too, because people ask me when I travel, I've said to people before, I said, I can always work. I can work when I'm 60, 70, 80, 90
Hmm.
whatever years old, depending, especially now with technology,
Yeah.
we can easily work. But I said, but I can't be rock climbing, running marathons, cliff jumping, doing, all these things that I can physically do now. But if I've got a knee issue, a hip problem, I can't walk. It's like we work during the prime of our life, waiting for retirement so we can enjoy life and do things we like to do. But then how many of us, even if we retire at 65, which a lot of people aren't because financially they can't do it,
That's right.
even if we get there, now 65 isn't so bad, but 70, 75, how many people are now starting to have health problems or they're worried because their knees aren't the same, the hips aren't the same, they don't have it. And I just think we should almost do the opposite where we should go to school for sure, and
Hmm.
then, it's like except for those who really know what they wanna do. They wanna be a doctor, they wanna be a lawyer, they really know what they want, great, go to university, go do that. But otherwise, I
Yeah.
think take time and travel. See the world, get
Hmm.
experiences because it was something I said to my daughter when she was considering university. I said, "There's jobs that exist now that aren't gonna exist in 10 years. And in 10 years' time, there's gonna be jobs that we don't even know about that will come about." And so, how do you even know what you like or don't like when you're going
Hmm.
to university at 18, 19, 20 years old? Like, you have no experience of the real world, which is,
Yeah.
I get we're set up to, as it used to be, to go work in the factory and come home and that's it. But I often say to people, like, if you can, travel, work abroad, work remotely, or get jobs. If you can, whatever skills that you have, find that job that you can work in another country doing that job. So you still have kind of that 9 to 5. You have automatic friends because you're in a company, but you're experiencing another culture and another place.
Exactly. Well, that's the thing. I think we all make that excuse of someday. Like we think we have all the time in the world. And I would like to believe it because I am a marathon runner, and I'm in great health now, even in my, late 40s. But still, you never know. Like, cause like I didn't travel really until I was like 40, until I was 40 years old. The first time I even went to Hawaii. I mean, how sad is that? I mean, it seemed like everybody gone to Hawaii but me because why? I always say, well, once I get myself to this place, then I'll enjoy it. Once I get to this place, then I'll do it. Once I do this, then I'll do it. But then it just takes me to one of the stories I had with one of my clients, I was talking to recently where like he's in his early 50s and he was on that track to try to retire in his 60s, hopefully. Like you said, sometimes it doesn't work. Like my dad had to work to his 70s. Even though he's such a good saver, it just wasn't enough. And
Mhm.
this guy was on that track to try to retire in his 60s too. And then he got this rare genetic medical condition that they found out about, where literally like the walls of his arteries, like thin like layers of those arteries,
Mhm.
like there's skin layers. Same thing with artery. A layer would peel off, and it could actually block his artery and kill him like that.
Oh my
And so
gosh.
he's literally like a ticking time bomb, and it shifted all of his priorities. Like, why am I just doing the traditional work and save hard and do this till I'm 65? I don't know if I'll even make it to 65. I hope I do, but I really don't have any guarantee here. And that's when he shifted, and that's where we got him. It's like, well, let's, instead of having that money, set it and forget it and let it sit there, and go up and down the bipolar waves of the stock market. What if we just got that money now to generate income? What if we put into real estate backed investments that have real assets backing it up that then also pay you at least say 10% a year? So, with him, he's like, he has a $500,000. That $500,000 can generate over $50,000 a year for him, which opens up those options. So he's actually looking to retire in the next couple of years, right? Or have that option. He could quit everything and just, be off. Now he still wants to keep working, of course, right? But it's nice to know that he has those options because if he's ever forced medically, he knows that he's not going to be frantically trying to figure out how does he take care of his family who are still, they're older kids, but they're still, some of them trying to get out of the house or trying to go to college, things like that. And
Right.
that's what's really important, and yeah, I think of another client we had too. Like they want to be they basically want to like homeschool their kids abroad, and
Okay.
so they were asking me, they're like, well, what do we do? And she loves, like, she has a side business, she has a business that she makes money in direct sales and whatnot. And then he was working a job that he's like, it's all right. So
Okay.
he's like, okay, is there a way to get me out of this at least? And I was like, well, what would be your ideal? They said, well, if we can just leave, like, we can just go to like Costa Rica or Mexico or something like that, give our kids an international experience, which they'll never get in public school. What if we could just do
Right.
that? And then my wife can just kind of do her business, but not even feel the pressure of that either. And so I said, well, let's look at what you've got money wise. And they didn't have a ton of savings. They had a little bit, but not a lot. But what they did have is they had a house with equity. And so I said, well, if you want to go abroad, now you're considering renting it out, and we ran the numbers. I'm like, you could, but if we just sold this property, this would give you like $400,000 we can invest to generate probably about $3,000 to $4,000 a month, which would be more than enough for them to be able to say, great, I'm out. I'm out of my job. Let's go. And so
Mm.
that's what we did. They got them to sell their house, got the equity out, started putting into real estate that now pays them money. So then they can go literally study abroad. Now they're like, in Cabo San Lucas is kind of where they decided to settle, right? And be able to live that life. And they're doing it in their early 40s. They didn't have to wait till later or wait till their kids are growing
Right.
up when now you've missed that opportunity to give them something so rare. Because I know, I mean, I've got adult children. Once they become adults, it's hard to nail them down. It's hard to get
Mhm.
them to, like, hey, let's go pack up and go on a trip. I know you got a job. I know you got school, but let's do it anyways, right? It's just
Yeah.
so much harder than when they're younger and you can have flexibility to have them have a different kind of lifestyle that most kids would never experience in their lifetimes.
And just what that does for them to have that experience as well.
Yeah.
Right. It just makes them, I think it gives people more empathy, makes people more open-minded. I've also often been asked a few like before, if I could have one rule or make one kind of change in the world. And I've
Hmm.
always said to make people live at least 1 to 2 years abroad after either after high school or after college, university kind of time frame, but to live at least 1 or 2 years abroad where they don't speak the local language.
Yeah.
And they have to move and they have to live there and they have to learn the language
Hmm.
because it's hard. There's
It is.
so many challenges to it. And just day-to-day life, and so I think once you do that and you also realize that just because we do things a certain way, whether, we do it in Canada, the US, or whatever, I've now realized that just because we do it a certain way doesn't mean it's right. It maybe
That's right.
maybe it's the easiest, maybe it's not, but with all the travel that I've done, it's also made me think my opinions, they are not right. They are not wrong. They're just my opinions from the way that I was raised, the things that my teachers taught me, my friends taught me, and my experiences that I've had. Because if I was taken from my parents when I was 2 years old, 1 year, 1 or 2 years old, and I was moved to China or Russia or well, Australia is pretty close.
Mhm.
Or I mean, even Spain, my
Yeah.
thoughts, beliefs, and everything would be completely different. And so I know that. And so when I love having conversations with people who don't have the same beliefs and thoughts as me.
Hmm.
But I have to be careful because people have to also enjoy those conversations because some people
Yeah.
are so close-minded that well, it's this and this. And I'm like, well, why do you think that? And they're like, because I'm right, because it's the way it is. And then I know I can't even have a conversation with you. But if they can say, well, I think this because I believe this because, and I will listen, not for them to change my mind, and I'll back I'm like, "No, but I think this because of
Hmm.
this," and we can have that kind of back and forth conversation, and I've had many that in the end, it's, I can understand if I had your experience and your life, I would believe those things too. I would believe exactly what you believe, but because my experience has been this, I
Hmm.
have I keep my belief. And so we can just agree to have different beliefs because we have different life experiences. And so nothing
Yeah.
is right or wrong. And especially when you get into things like religion and politics, which people are so like,
Mhm.
you agree with everything or you're the enemy, which is completely absurd because no matter what somebody thinks or believes or where they're from or religious, political, or anything, even if we think right now that they technically might be the enemy of, we can always find common ground. And it's
That's
unfortunate
right.
that the media and the government makes us enemies of when the reality is if we were just a bunch of people at a dinner party, at a social gathering, because we had some mutual friends. Like, other than that, we would always find other things that we would find in common. Or, many people travel for work and they go to conferences and conventions, and of course they have that work thing in common, whether they're in the same line of work. But all the people that they meet, they always find other things in common. So I
That's
always say to
so
people, we
true.
can always find things in common, and it's with travel too, it just opens that up, and whether it's you like the culture, you like the different things that they celebrate, you love the food that they have. I mean, there's just so many things, and you've gone through the same things of growing up in some tough times or loss of friends, family, parent. I mean, there's so many things that there's always many ways that we find common ground with people that we think we have no common ground with.
Oh, it's so true. I mean, I, I think we live in a great country, in the United States here, and I'm not saying it's perfect, but
There
the
isn't a
more
perfect
people I
country.
talk to abroad, the more I realize it's actually much better than what the media and especially the youth make it out to be, right? Because really in the United States, we got a bunch of spoiled brats. I mean, all of us have really become spoiled brats, because whenever I talk to, and I love when I get people that are like immigrants, that talk on my show, my own podcast, right? Because I mean, when they talk about it, they're like, you don't understand how easy it is here in America compared to where I just came from. Whether it's like Germany, like I had a guy that was on, I was like, why are you here in the United States doing real estate investing? Like, do you understand how easy it is to be here to actually create wealth? He's like, we
Business
don't get
is
that there.
so easy in the United States. It's incredible. Like
Oh yeah.
I've been to over 50 countries and I've lived
Mhm.
in 5 and every time it's like it is so easy in the US to be a business owner and make money.
Oh, yeah. And I'll tell you, like, media really does a disservice to us that way. Like, they really do an amazing job making us think that somehow things stink here. Because, like, I lived in Japan for 2 years in the mid to late 90s. I lived abroad there. And you talk about trying to learn a new language, that one sucks. Okay. Like, that's one of the
That would be
hardest
really
languages.
hard.
It was a tough one. I got to the point where eventually I was fluent enough that I could fool people when I called them on the phone. They actually thought they were talking to a native speaker, but it took me almost the
Wow.
full 2 years to get to that point,
I
and
bet.
immersing myself in it, like talking like 10, 12 hours a day, in
Right.
Japanese, where there weren't any English speakers really. But it was interesting because when I first got there, I was thinking, oh, Japan, right? Remember, this is mid to late 90s. I was
Mhm.
thinking, oh, Japan's like the dominant, like it's like what people talk about China being today, right? Like, oh, it's
Mhm.
the best, biggest country there is, strong, they'd overtake us anytime. I get over to Japan, I was like, oh, your guys' economy is so strong. We're like, what are you talking about? We're in a recession. Your guys' economy is strong. Like, what are you talking about? Like, no, because I watched Gung Ho with Michael Keaton. I saw what happens there, and my dad told me, I even saw you guys in Portland, Oregon, where I grew up. I'm like, you guys have been buying up all this real estate. What I didn't know is they had been selling the real estate the last few years in the 90s because they were like trying to liquidate. They were having their own recession that lasted for 30 freaking years. They're just now
Yeah.
coming out of a 30-year recession. Like, I mean, even when I
It's
first
like the
moved there,
longest in history of any country.
yeah, it was ridiculous. They even had negative interest rates. I mean, they were trying all kinds of things to pull themselves out. And so, going into that environment to say like, oh, maybe I was wrong. And even like, talk I was fortunate enough to talk to some people because I would go talk to people on the streets, sometimes talk to them in their homes and things like that. And I ran into a guy that was actually a kamikaze pilot in World War II. And I thought like, oh man, I'm obviously an American. I'm one of the only white people in this whole town. It's pretty easy to spot me. And and I'm like, hey, hope there's no hard feelings about World War II. He's like, what are you talking about? We were idiots. We're the ones that did it. He's like, but you know who's my favorite person in history? General MacArthur. I love that guy. He's a great guy. If it weren't for him, if we were for you guys, we'd not be the superpower we were today because you guys essentially rebuilt us. I'm like, we did? Because I didn't know that history. I didn't realize that we put so many billions of dollars into their economy to rebuild them after we blew them up. And so
US really helped rebuild a lot of countries. They could have just said, "Sorry about your luck," but they really did help rebuild a lot.
they really did. Yeah. I mean, that's the that was the irony because he even told me, he's like, yeah, like, what did we say after bombing Pearl Harbor? Yeah, that was unfortunate. We didn't even apologize. But you guys apologized by actually doing something about it. So I agree with you. Like, the more I go abroad, the more people I talk to that aren't in my little social media bubble, right? That,
Mhm.
get in that little algorithmic bubble. If you get outside of it, you realize that really we're just a bunch of spoiled brats that need to get out. We need to experience different things. And our children, even more so, need to experience it too.
Right. Right. Even when I brought my daughter when she was younger traveling to different places and we went to a variety of places and I always showed her places that, there were people that lived in, I'll call them huts with dirt
Yeah.
floors. And I said, that could be us. We were just
Hmm.
lucky where we were born, and then we still had to put in the work. So
Yeah.
when people are like, "Oh, you're so lucky, you travel, you do all these things," and I said, "Well, I was lucky I was born in Canada.
Hmm.
Absolutely, because I didn't get to pick that. That was sheer luck. However, I still had to put in all the work. I still had to do everything. And so I think luck only is just a very small portion because even if we look at people and we hear about them who we would say had bad luck, who, born into poverty, they were homeless and they put in the work and then they
Hmm.
became rich and famous. So there is that work aspect. But I think that one thing that people really need to do is, for one, love what you do. figure it out what you do. And it doesn't mean you have to do it forever. It could be
Yeah.
you love it and you're gonna have an exit strategy of, you know what, I am gonna work my butt off. I love what I do and I'm gonna put in the hours right now because I'm gonna have a 5-year exit strategy. And I'm building up and I'm selling in 5 years. And then I'm gonna take that and invest or whatever it may be. Maybe
Yeah.
it's a 10-year one. I've got a friend who's thinking about a business. It's like, I don't want to be tied down. I'm like, but it's not forever. I'm like, if you build up to a certain point, you say, this is my exit strategy and this is where I'm going to get it to be. And then I'm selling. And these are kind of the companies that I would hopefully sell to. And then you're definitely at retirement or your next, whatever it is
Yeah.
that you want to do. But I think one big thing that everybody needs to do is to stop watching mainstream media
Hmm.
and get off. I want to say a lot of social media. Not all social
Yeah.
media is bad because there's stuff that I'll scroll sometimes and I'll be like, "Ooh, I need to save this because that was good. Like that was an important tidbit," or "Ooh, I need to check out that
Yeah.
new whatever website it is or try this for marketing or stuff," because there is some valuable information there, but it's a lot of the I don't care what anybody in Hollywood's doing because they don't affect my life at all. Don't care, don't watch it, don't click on it. Same thing with sports. I'm not a sports person. I know there are people that are, and if it's that's your entertainment and enjoyment, okay, fine to a certain degree, but whether your team wins or loses, I mean, unless you're betting, um, not really going to affect your life and you're spending hours doing what instead of something else. Unless you're financially good, then you know what? Great, do those things that you like, but then it also kind of comes back to how much do you need to survive and to live? Because the more social media, TV we watch, we need millions. We need to be a billionaire. But
Yeah.
the reality is we don't. Of course, things are more expensive now and are kind of getting even more expensive, and hopefully that'll slow down. But at the
Mhm.
same point, there's other countries where things aren't nearly as expensive, especially,
Yep.
if you want to be traveling and moving to other countries. But the reality is too, is what do you really need? Like, if your TV works fine, do you really need a bigger TV? Do you really
Mhm.
need another pair of shoes, dress, a newer car? Really? Like, your car is not working?
Yeah.
It doesn't, and so there's all of those things that I say to people. It's like, what do you need? And often when I do things too, it's like, if you buy something, you have to get rid of something. So when I started that when I was traveling because I had limited luggage space. So if I was going to buy a new sweater, buy a new dress, or buy a new whatever, I had to get rid of one. And if I looked at my stuff and
Yeah.
I didn't want to get rid of one, I just then I didn't go shopping to buy one. And so just
Mhm.
don't put yourself in the situation of shopping and get rid of Amazon. Get rid of it. We don't need it. Like I'm in Montenegro. I have a place here in Montenegro. There is no Amazon. There is no deliveries. There's no, I mean, we get mail, of course, but and I don't miss it because I don't need anything, and that's what people
You
need to
don't
get
need a
away. If
daily
you
drop off.
No, not at all, and how much and if we get rid of all that stuff that we don't need, that stuff weighs us down, and people doesn't realize it's like, "Oh, I have all this stuff. I have my house. I've gotta sell this. I've gotta do that." It's just a whole weight, then I'll just stay, as opposed to just get rid of most of it, lighten up the load, maybe put some stuff in storage, um, or maybe at a friend's place if it's only a few boxes or something, and travel and do things, and you'll realize after so many years, unless it's some family heirloom type things and things that are really important, we don't need any of that, and you generally don't miss it.
Mhm. So true. Well, that's one thing that my wife kinda helped me realize too is, I mean, even though I've never been really extravagant anyways, but she said, "Well, what kind of lifestyle do we really want? Do we," we have a pretty nice home because we got a lot of kids, we make sure we got
Yeah,
land, we got our chickens, we got all that stuff. But I'll tell you, like, she wanted the chickens, she wanted the garden, she wanted that self-sustainability, but then she also realized it took away from our ability to just pack up and move somewhere, right? Because now
right,
you're committed. That's why when people say, "Should you own a home or rent?" Well, it depends. What kind of life do you want? Like, if you want to be more mobile, renting is a great option. And I'll tell you, as a homeowner, and I'm sure many of you as homeowners already know this, it's not exactly an investment, right? Like
right,
it's an expense. I mean, we paid 100 grand to repair a basement that was flooding, because we didn't have enough sump pumps out there when there was the extra rainstorms and things like that. And so we had to rebuild our basement. That's not an investment. That's a
no,
crappy expense that if I were renting, I wouldn't have to pay for. And so there's pros and cons to each, but that's why this
mhm,
really is about the life you design. Like, how do you want your life to be? Do you want to be tethered? or do you want to have that freedom and that ability, and having less stuff, and not being as, trapped by your things can be so liberating, to have less
Yeah.
things, less responsibility, less hassle, and that allows you to
Equals
have
more
more freedom
freedom.
faster.
Yeah, definitely. So, Chris, if people wanted to get in touch with you to learn more about you, and you can maybe help them with the investments and stuff, and to get them on a good path so they can have more freedom, what is the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Just remember money ripples, whether it's moneyripples.com, at Money Ripples for social media, as well as our Money Ripples podcast. You can follow us there too.
Perfect. And we'll make sure to put that in the show notes. So I just want to say thank you very much for your time today, Chris. It was great talking with you.
Same here. Really appreciate it, Sally.